ladies and gentlemen, it's the first for AUSI New South Wales is to run our normal monthly lecture and presentation by way of Zoom. But unfortunately, within the COVID-19 challenges, I think this will be the way of the future, at least in the short to medium term. By way of introduction, if I went to Senator Jim Molan, the full biography, we'd be here for the rest of the afternoon. But he's had a wonderful, wonderful career. First, after 40 years service in the Australian Army, which he left in July 2008. And during that time, he was an infantryman, an Indonesian speaker, a helicopter pilot. He saw service in Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, East Timor, Malaysia, Germany, the United States, and importantly, Iraq. In 2004, he deployed for a year to Iraq as the coalition's chief of operations. And during this period, he controlled the whole of the manoeuvre operations of all forces, all friendly forces in Iraq, including the security of Iraq's oil, electricity, and rail infrastructure. For this distinguished service, he was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross by the Australian Government and also the Legion of Merit by the United States Government. And it was a pleasure for me to actually be in Canberra at the time and to attend the service when Senator Molan was awarded the Legion of Merit. He then he left the military. He was a commentator on defence and security issues, principal of AADI Defence Proprietary Limited. He also was involved with, as a consultant with BAE Systems Australia and Israeli aeronautical industries. He was made an officer in the Order of Australia for his role in the Indonesia and East Timor in 1999. And since 2017, when he was declared as a senator for New South Wales, he's been involved in a number of Senate committees. And as you appreciate, we're just about to enter the estimates. Well, we're involved in the estimates committee meetings this week and next week. So it's a wonderful opportunity to welcome Senator Jim Molan to RUSI New South Wales, where he's going to speak on the next 100 years and articulate Australia's future, the challenges and opportunities ahead. Thank you, Jim.
Paul, thank you very, very much for the invitation. And it's great that you've got in these days of Zoom, it's great that you've got 40 plus people on your Zoom. I think it's so important at the moment. And I think so many of us have learned so much about how to communicate in this situation. And who knows what the future will hold for us, but I think it's very, very important that we can. I chose for the topic the next 100 years of Australia. And the only reason that I choose that topic is because we have benefited from about 120 years of federation, of being a nation, and where we are at the moment as prior to COVID, an incredibly prosperous country. We were and probably still are round about the 12th largest GDP in the world out of 200 nations, a nation of only 25 million people, but with the 12th largest GDP in the world, and Russia is the 13th largest GDP in the world. And that's an important point. And I flog this point to death whenever I'm talking to people, because we have this appalling view in Australia at the moment that we could do nothing to defend ourselves should the world go bad in our region. And it is absolutely crucial that we realise that we are or we could be an absolute superpower within our region. And we're pretty well at now based on the size of our economy. And we just make a decision not to be based on from security points of view. So the last 120 years of federation have delivered to this nation the most extraordinary prosperity. And what in particular has delivered that to us has been the market. The market has been quite unbelievable. And we have made the best, regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on, we have made great use of the market. We've subjected ourselves to the market and we've done very, very well. The second thing that's given us this great prosperity over the last 120 years, in fact, over the last 75 years, since 1945, is the power of the United States. The power of the United States has, without doubt, been the single biggest factor in this nation's, in building this nation. It's allowed us not to have to put much money into defence, and it's allowed us to trade in the most incredible way across the world, by the fact that in most of the world we haven't had a disruption to the sea lines of communication or to our markets. And I'd say to you that period of time where US power delivered to Australia extraordinary prosperity and total security, with, of course, the premium we paid being the deployment of small forces long distance from this country, with almost no exceptions, long distance from this country to achieve, to assist the Americans to achieve what we call global stability. We've done relatively well in relation to that. I'd say, though, that COVID hasn't changed that, but it's emphasised the changes that were in track before COVID. And the diminution of American power, which is quite dramatic. I have this argument at least 3 times a day about the diminution of US power. We say to ourselves in this country, and I've had it said to my face so often, what could we do? Should we have to defend ourselves? Why should we defend ourselves? Because the Americans will always come to our aid. Well, my estimation is that American power, as it existed at the end of the Cold War, has now been reduced by roughly 30 to 50%. And if you take the US Navy, for example, at the end of the Cold War, it had 600 ships. It's now got less than 300 ships. Now, that's fantastic. People could say, yeah, but they're better ships. And maybe they are. I don't doubt that they are. But there's no good having a fantastic ship in the Mediterranean or the Baltic if you need it in the South China Sea. You know, mass and scale has a value all to its own. The US Air Force has been pouring money into the Joint Strike Fighter, and hopefully one day it will produce the promise of the Joint Strike Fighter. The American military is probably the American Air Force is probably 2,000 to 3,000 pilots short of where it should be. And that is a dramatic problem for them. And why the reason that that's the case is that the money that's been spent on defence, particularly over the last decade in the United States, until the last year, has been dramatically reduced. The United States used to spend on defence in today's dollars roughly $750 billion per year. Now, if you just think about that for one little second, $750 billion per year. That's what they've been spending in today's dollars roughly since the end of the Second World War. Now, we spend between $30 and $40 billion on defence, and people say, well, you know, and during Obama's time, because they were sick to death, particularly of the years of war in the Middle East, that was reduced to roughly $500 billion per year. Now, when you take $250 billion per year out of the US Defence Force, you get a situation where the Army, with 50 what they call brigade combat teams, which are brigades fundamentally, brigades of all sorts. At one stage 2 years ago, the Americans had 2 of those brigades. Just confirmed, 50 brigade combat teams in the US military, only 2 of them were prepared for combat. So we've got a Navy which is half strength, an Air Force which is in great, extraordinary transition, and an Army which 2 years ago had 2 of its 50 brigade combat teams. The last Chief of Navy has now brought that up to 20 or so of the American brigades which are ready for combat. Now, that wouldn't be too much of a problem, except for the other factor that we've got to consider in the next 100 years of this nation. And that is the rise of 4 nations and an ideology. The ideology, of course, is Islamic extremism, which is still there. It still hates the West. It hates everything that we stand for. It hates a prosperous Australia. And Islamic extremism doesn't value freedom. It doesn't value equality with women. It doesn't value absolutely anything that makes Australia what it is. And it would destroy us if it got the chance. We have smashed it down a number of times in various places, and it just goes down, and it's waiting to pop back up. It's in the region, as we know, in small parts of Indonesia, in larger parts of the Philippines. And of course, it comes out in terrorism, and sometimes it comes out in foreign interference in our way of life. So of the things that threaten us at a time when American power is low, Islamic extremism, I think at the moment, is probably the least of our worries. What should concern us more is the rise of 4 nations. And those 4 nations are Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Russia, of course, is a Pacific power. It doesn't have much of its military power. As I said, it has a GDP smaller than Australia's, but it does run about 300,000 people in its military. It runs an air force, which is pretty impressive for regional terms, and it's got a nuclear capability, and it's on its way back. It's pushing the Baltics like they haven't been pushed for a long, long time. It's running wars in the Ukraine, in the Donbass, and it's about to get, I suspect, involved in a war in the South Caucasus, and of course Belarus is there in a very, very strange situation, and anything could happen in that nation. So one of the nations that rises is Russia. We could say, who cares? That's Europe's problem. It's not our problem. As I said, Russia is an Asian power, but it doesn't have vast amounts of power. What it does have, it does have, for convenience sake, a relationship with China, and China, of course, is the other nation on the rise. People say to me, if America is spending $750 billion a year on defence, it's spending more than the next 10 nations in dollar terms put together. And that's quite true. If you do the add-ups and takeaways in dollars terms, that's quite true. China, of course, is the 2nd largest. Japan's the 3rd largest. And we're about, I think, in dollar terms, certainly 6th in our region. But anyone who considers that Australia is the 6th strongest nation in this region, in the Indo-Pacific, is stark raving mad. These kind of summaries of military capability can be very, very deceiving. If you go for pricing parity terms, China is spending 80% of what America is spending on its military. Its military expenditure has gone up 800% in the last 20 or 30 years. And the reason for that is that at one stage, I remember when Paul and I were Major Generals together, I remember getting someone to say, just compare my salary with a Chinese general, which they did. And they came back and they said, well, you make about 100 times what a Chinese generals make. And that made me feel really good. Unfortunately, I'd like to think that I'm better than any Chinese general, but I doubt whether I'm 100 times better. So pricing parity terms, you can see how China can be spending 80% of what the US is spending on defence, even though in dollar terms, it doesn't look anything like it. So we've got Russia on the rise, but probably not with the sustainable economic or military power that China's got. You've got China, which is on the rise and is looking for its place, not just in the region, but its place in the world. You've got Iran, which sits atop not every bit, it sits atop 90% of the crude or processed fuel that enters this country. So if there was a war in the Gulf, and Iran is the largest purveyor of terrorism in the Gulf, bar none, and President Obama, when of course he ran the comprehensive treaty to try and stop Iran getting the bomb, and all he did was kick the can down the road, as they say, Obama gave back to Iran billions and billions of dollars, which has subsequently been spent to the chagrin of many Iranians in wars in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Gaza. That money has gone to terrorism, no two ways about it. So that's Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, of course, is the other thing that we've got to take into account. You know, as I heard someone say the other day, North Korea has not seen a missile or a nuclear weapon that it didn't love. But I don't think my view is that if the Americans, that if North Korea makes a threatening motion towards the Americans will strike it, and they'll strike it with nuclear weapons, and it will be wiped off the face of the earth. This really goes to where I think we should consider our future, our next 100 years. The nation which has given us prosperity and security over the last 75 years is 30 to 50% less military capable than it was in the past. Those that oppose Western ideas and Western values, of which we are a paragon, are Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, none of whom have really a great value, a great sympathy for us or respect for us. They'll buy our exports and do great things with our exports, but really they don't. We are a small player in this game. So I believe that this is where we are after COVID. We have realised, as a result of COVID, and a bit result of the fires on the southeastern coast, mainly as a result of COVID, the extraordinary vulnerabilities that Australia suffers. As I say, the market has given us extraordinary prosperity. We flog off our exports and we buy in our imports. We only produce 60% of what we consume in manufactures in this country. The other 40%, normally the high end of those manufactures, come in from overseas. And of course, we are totally dependent for our standard of living on our exports. And we've found the market has ensured that we're in a system where we owe to China a great vulnerability because they are our major customer. 30% of our exports, I understand, go to China. Therefore, they are pretty well able to dictate, and that's what they're trying to do to us at the moment. So you put all of that together, and I look back over our 120 years of history, and I just happen to notice, as I'm sure you may all notice, that Australia has never been prepared for one war or one conflict in 120 years. Now, many of you, like Paul and I, have been members of the armed forces for maybe the last 40 or 50 years, God help us all. But we were appallingly unprepared for the First World War, hopelessly unprepared for the Second World War. And after that, because of US power, all we had to do was send a couple of battalions here and there for Korea. We were lucky we had something that was, battalion in Korea that had, and Mustang fighters and ships at sea had just gone through the Second World War and were able quickly to transfer. You know, we know that in Vietnam, the first battalion that went to Vietnam still had elements that hadn't done live firing and were doing them in the sandhills when they were arriving, finishing off their training when they arrived in Vietnam. And from then, we have only ever agreed to take part in wars of choice. And those wars of choice, with the exception, bit of an exception in East Timor, those wars of choice were really, Vietnam is a great example, because we decided if we'd go to Vietnam, when we would go to Vietnam, what forces we would take to Vietnam, what they would do when they get there, whether they'd fight hard or fight less, and when we would come home. That makes that a war of choice. And we can do wars of choice on our ear. We've got the best the ADF has been for all of my exposure to it. The ADF is brilliant in relation to what we've had to do for the last 75 years. Absolutely brilliant. However, I don't think it has almost no capability for what may be coming down the track towards us. Not only is the ADF severely deficient despite what my government has done, what the Morrison government has done, the last couple of years of the Howard government, we were then blown away by Rudd Gillard Rudd. When we're now back with Abbott, Turnbull, and Morrison is doing a fantastic job trying to drag us back up so we've got some form of capable military. So that's what I reckon leads us into the next 100 years. Where we are now is the basis of 120 years. Fat, dumb and happy, rich and prosperous, all because of the Americans, plus, of course, our national institutions, which are fabulous. And we are a great country. We could be a superpower. And in my view, given what's likely to be coming down the track towards us, we must increase our ability to do it. The answer to how we do it must start with what's called a national security strategy. And that national security strategy must base itself on the likely scenarios we're likely to face. COVID is not the worst thing we're going to face in the future. It's been pretty awful and it's hurt a lot of people, but it's not the worst thing that we're going to face. The worst thing we're going to face is probably a war between China and the United States, and we could be collateral damage in that war. Of course, as soon as that happens, we would have no exports, we would have no inputs, we would have to rely on everything that we make in Australia and we can produce in Australia because, you know, as soon as the war comes to this part of the world, even heightened tensions, not one ship will visit this country. And because they can't get insurance, they won't come to this part of the world. So, Paul, I might leave it there. I've just done a podcast because this is the reason I came back into the Senate. I came back into the Senate despite the kind of hiccup that my party decided to give me the boot. I came back in, fought my way back into the Senate for the simple fact that we must take a national security approach to this country so that for the first time, we are prepared for the next national emergency, particularly if it involves combat. And anyone who doesn't think that we will be part of the next war, a war between China and America, is stark raving mad and is irresponsible in the extreme if we don't prepare for it. So I call that podcast Noise Before Defeat, from the famous Sun Tzu saying that if you don't get your strategy right, doesn't matter how good your submarines are and your ships are and your troops are and your tanks are and your joint strike fighters are, what you do is noise before defeat. And I've put that podcast, I released the first one only a day or so ago, and that's on my website, jimmolan.com. It's also on Spotify and the Apple podcast. But there'll be 5 more of those, and they really go through the introduction, the nature of modern war, the vulnerabilities, internal and external, that we have in this nation, and the fact that we could be, if we wanted to, a superpower to defend ourselves, to maintain our sovereignty and our way of life. And then the last one, I give the solution as to how we could get there. So, Paul, I might leave it at that, if I may, and if anyone's got any questions, I'm very, very happy to answer them.
Ken?
Thank you, Senator, for your talk.
Thanks,
We've seen
Ken.
in recent months the great destruction around Australia from the natural disasters and loss of mobility. And of course, COVID has complicated matters enormously. And the states have locked themselves down. So what do these events imply for the defence of Australia, especially the role of the states whose cooperation would be essential?
That's a very, very good question, and we've thought about this and we've spoken about this amongst my colleagues and amongst officials. The conclusion fundamentally is that it should not mean much in a scenario where the federal government uses its constitutional powers in an emergency situation. At the moment, we cannot determine these things because we do not have the power, and if we declared an emergency and used constitutional power, we'd spend the rest of our lives in the High Court and we'd probably lose. So on the basis that our federation gives priority to the states, except in the kind of situation that you're talking about, Ken, we can't do it now, but I'm pretty satisfied that in a defence emergency, we've just given ourselves greater powers, put bills through the Parliament, which gives us greater powers in relation to counter-terrorism in the states, gives us greater powers in relation to defining what the states do in the foreign affairs space. And should that go to the next step, should there be a defence emergency, we would declare a defence emergency, and the states would not be able, if a state didn't want to work with us, it would have to work with us.
Senator Ron Lyons,
Ron, hi.
is it time for a concentrated economic initiative, a la what you've just been saying, in terms of economic mobilisation? In other words, bring back things like the old industrial mobilisation course and initiatives.
Yeah, Ron, we are edging towards that. The problem is that there's only a certain number of people within government that hold the kind of views that I hold. What I've got to do is convince government to take the threat of war seriously. Now the Prime Minister came out fabulously on the 1st of July, I think it was, and announced in the middle of COVID, in the middle of what it's costing us, I've got the greatest respect for him because his policy initiatives are mind-bogglingly good, and I worked very closely with him during the time of the stopping the boats. And we stopped the boats, we worked out a strategy, and his ability to turn a strategy into action is mind-boggling. On the 1st of July, he announced a strategic update, the best strategic update I have ever seen. And if anyone's interested in this, please read the speech that he gave when he was announcing the strategic update. And also he announced at the time $270 billion over the next 10 years for defence. I don't take that too seriously, but as we're not convinced within the government as a whole that what the Prime Minister said should go to exactly where you're going, Ron, and that is the whole nation's got to do this. I had some fantastic talks yesterday with the Department of Industry, the industry minister, Karen Andrews, asked me to go and talk to them on the issue of national security. They've got the message. They just need our government to give them the guidance to prepare for this. They're preparing, God bless them, and they'll do a good job. They are preparing for another COVID. And that's great. That's fantastic. We've done well at COVID. It took us too long and it cost us too much, but we've got to learn from that, and that's what they're doing. And I was very impressed yesterday with the meeting I had with them. My view is we've got to prepare. COVID is the minimum thing that will happen to us going into the future. Another COVID, another pandemic. The kind of middle scenario that I would use to prepare this nation is an uptick in the grey zone. We're in the middle of a grey zone conflict at the moment. Grey zone conflict is where you're not too sure whether you're in competition or conflict. I mean, the US FBI is currently handling 2,000 cases of Chinese espionage and intellectual property theft and foreign interference. The US has closed down 4 consulates in the United States, Chinese consulates, because they've been spying. This is grey zone stuff. Hacking the ANU, hacking Parliament House, foreign interference, trying to buy our politicians. All of this is grey zone. The next step up from grey zone might involve much more direct things. I reckon that's what we should be concentrating on, the medium scenario.
David Lees, Jim, you have made a fairly strong case, I think, for increasing the size of the Australian Defence Force. I certainly agree with you that the very, very small force we have at the moment is only suitable for wars of choice, if you've defined them. What size of a defence force do you think we should be aiming for in the medium term?
And I could give you my view on that, David, and I'd be very happy to, except it depends what war you think that we should be preparing for. So if we what I'm saying to government is that we've got to sit down and we've got to go through a full strategic analysis. At the moment, the amount of fuel we've got in this country for the nation will only last 23 days. So let's not worry about the military, because in 23 days, the civilian consumption of fuel, we won't have any petrol or diesel in Australia. Now, the government has just put a whole bunch of money into it. We're just about to start building storage in this nation. And if we need to, we can start pulling crude out of the ground. But at the moment, Victoria won't let us, and Queensland won't let us because they're all greenies. So, but in a defence emergency, we could do it just by saying we could do it. But to do any bloody good with it, we need more refining capability. At the moment, we've got 4 refineries left in this country, which are suffering at the moment because no one's using any petrol, therefore they can't sell it. But when the country was running normally, it was using 80%. The refineries were working to 80% maximum capacity. And 90% of the stuff they put into the refineries came from the Gulf in the form of crude. Now, we're pulling out almost none of our own gas or our own crude to turn into various liquid fuels to run the country because we can buy cheaper overseas. So the market delivers us prosperity, it doesn't deliver us security. It's created a vulnerability a mile high. So if I said, if I said in the Second World War, we sustained, in a population of 7 million, we sustained a military of roughly 700,000 people, 10% of our population was in the military. That's 2.5 million people nowadays, but I couldn't care less to put 2.5 million people into, boots and give them a rifle. Well, we wouldn't have enough rifles. We've got nothing to give them. So you've got to sit down and go through that procedure. In the Second World War, we had 10% of our people in the military, but that's irrelevant now. We've got to decide in the first instance what war we think we want to win and then go back and work from there.
Okay, next
The
question.
New South Wales border, and
Yep.
I'm watching the war on COVID, and the lads who are down here, I watch the units they come from, something from 2nd, 17th, David, doing a great job, but there aren't enough of them. So wouldn't a dash and national service be educative and useful at the low level?
Now, if people need more of the ADF, they can get it tomorrow. Seriously, we will pour. We've now got 20,000 people in our reserve force and 30,000 in the army. 20,000 in I think it's 20,000 in the total reserve, 30,000 in the army, 58 or 60,000 in the ADF as a whole. If the government and state governments want more, they just need to ask.
David Lees, when you spoke to us in February 2009, Jim, you spoke to us about the future of Afghanistan. You were quite pessimistic about it at the time. I'm wondering whether you could tell us what you now see as being the future of Afghanistan and that South Central Asian area.
Yeah, I think that see, we pulled out so fast, you couldn't see us for dust. The Americans have now pulled most out, and I think they're down to 4,500. They put it in the last couple of weeks. They've put some more back in. The Americans dumped on the Afghans because they set up a discussion with the Taliban, but it was a discussion between the Americans and the Taliban and not the Afghan government. The Americans have come to some agreement with the Taliban. The Afghan government's now involved. In how that goes, I don't know. There has been no diminution in violence as there was supposed to be. There is no way in the world can you trust an Islamic extremist organisation in any way, shape or form in any part of the world. And anyone who thinks that they can negotiate with these people is looking for an excuse to go home. We're not negotiating, we'll negotiate, declare victory and go home. And that's the approach. The Americans have gone back in, I think, they've gone back in for a counter-terrorist reason. And they selectively whack people. They've done some fighting again in the last couple of weeks. So I think it's up in the air. I think the thing that is different now than whenever it was we went in first, when was that, 2001 or 2 or something, after 9/11, The thing that's different now is that a lot more Afghans understand the value of personal freedom. And I don't think the Taliban will get purchase in the cities that they once had. They'll get purchase in the Pashtun areas of the countryside. And I think they will dominate the road system and the minor towns outside. But in the major towns, the big change in the female vote, the fact that women have experienced a degree of freedom, women have experienced education, men see the value of this and that. It may not be as easy as it was last time, but I'd rather not be. I'd rather be an Australian than an Afghan. It's not a good future.
Thank you.
Okay. One last question. Okay, Jim, normally at this time, if you're in person, I'd be thanking you profusely for a wonderful presentation, illuminating, where you've been able to raise a large number of issues, and that's been supplemented by some very searching questions. We normally give our presenters a 12-month membership of Roost in New South Wales, as well as a selection of ties. So I hope you can see this as a tri-service tie. You can have a red one or a blue one. And
I'd love a blue one.
I'll send you. You have a blue one?
Thank
I
you.
think that'll be appropriate. Anyway, can I thank you and wish you and your family a wonderful Christmas. And thanks again for an illuminating presentation.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you all for being interested. You know, the obligation that we have in our generation is to tell the next generation that's coming through what's going on in the world, because they haven't got a clue. Thanks, Paul. Thank you all. It's been good.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim. Really good.
Thank you.